and welcome to my channel. Recently I had a huge coloring block, and when I tried to find a solution to it, how to return to coloring, I decided that maybe I need to look back at all my coloring books and to start coloring in the books which I hadn't started yet or which I had abandoned for a long time. When I looked at my shelves, I noticed a huge coloring book dedicated to Tolkien world. I purchased it more than 4 years ago because I'm a huge fan of everything about Tolkien world, and I do love the artist style here. I think that this huge book, it's second edition where there are two previous books printed together. Well, it's a nice one, even if I would prefer a book with bigger amount of portraits of main heroes, but still, the world of Tolkien here is represented quite well. When I got it, I was also pleasantly surprised by white thick paper. I hoped that it would be perfect for both pencils and watercolors, because many of the pictures here, they are landscapes, pictures with a lot of sky, cloud, mountains, fields of grass, and many of them are two-page spreads. So definitely not a thing which you could color with just pencils. And style of these pictures, it definitely require mixed media, watercolor for the background and then pencils for the details. But it was such a huge disappointment. When I started to test watercolor in this book, I realized that it's one of those papers where you can get dots. If you have collection of coloring books and if you tried watercolors, I think that you are familiar with this strange thing when even thick paper can create those strange dots when you apply watercolor or other water-based media. I don't know the reason behind of it. Maybe it's kind of something inside of the paper or how they prepare it for printing. I had several examples of such things. Sometimes I have such ugly dots in Kirby Razana's Fragile World or World Within Worlds. I had very big problems with paper in Tamoka Tashira, and now here. It's definitely one of the worst papers for watercolors, even if it's quite thick. I did my first test here for the sky, and dots were so ugly that they definitely ruined the whole landscape. My obvious solution was to try and to prepare paper with gesso. I did it 4 years ago, and result was far from perfect, but indeed amount of dots were considerably lesser. So this time I decided that's what I need to do, to apply gesso, then to do watercolor background, and to work on the rest of the picture with my pencils. But gesso is also tricky, at least for myself. Acrylic gesso is basically quite thick liquid, similar to acrylic paint, and when you apply it to the paper, even if you use a soft white flat brush, after drying there are still sensible those brush strokes. And when I started to apply watercolor, paint started to gather exactly where those invisible brush strokes were. Also, paint didn't absorb into surface uh, of the paper very quickly. Paper buckled and created waves. Paint wanted to create those pools inside of those waves and buckles. So during first 10 minutes, the only thing I did it was to check those pools of water and paint and to pour them into different directions to prevent them from creating ugly stains. I imagined that here I want to have background in rich mahogany, magenta, um, perylene violet colors, but also with small uh, golden glow in the middle and behind the figure of this goblin. First moments of painting were really disappointing. I was ready to abandon this one because I really didn't like how I started to color this one. But then I told myself that it's nothing to lose. In this book we have many similar pictures, some simplified landscape and other some evil creatures, trolls, goblins, or things like this one. And I think that similar pictures we have probably on 10 more pages here. So nothing to lose, definitely. Not the best picture here, not the most beautiful, not the most interesting, but it's perfect for experimenting. From my previous experience, sometimes such not very inspiring, not very beautiful pictures, in the end they could look quite interesting because you feel more free, less pressed to with interesting color palettes, with combining different media. So even despite my big disappointment in behavior of acrylic gesso and watercolor paints, I decided to proceed. I applied a couple of layers of those watercolor paints and my paper. It was so wet that I even lost a couple of areas. If you look closer at the uh, right top corner, you will see that I tear off the corner of the page, and I also created tiny hole in the surface of the paper closer to the binding. Book is actually very thick, so it was difficult to lay it flat on the table, and the whole area of this paint it tended to flow into the direction of the binding because of this not very flat position on my table. Paint gathered in pools, paint didn't want to spread and to blend together, but I decided that no, I won't be abandoning it. I decided that I will do basic watercolor layers on the sky, on the ground and on the water, and then I can continue to improve those areas which I totally dislike with pencils. Usually polychromos pencils behave very well on top of a watercolor layer, but here it wasn't a very easy thing. When you apply gesso, it creates quite a rough texture on the paper, similar to sandpaper. Sandpaper texture could be really good for drawing with soft pastel, but definitely not for drawing with colored pencils. That's why I prepared with gesso only background area and I hadn't touched those areas of goblins' bodies and part of the wall. I realized that even when I work with pencils on top of watercolor, pigment of pencil didn't want to stick to the paper. Even after a couple of hours, when I touched surface of this background, there was pigment on the tips of my fingers. So now when I close the book, I need to put something between two pages if I don't to mess up with the left part of the page. So it was also slightly messy coloring. I discovered for myself many things, and yes, I intend to finish this page because I do love uh, how pencils behave here, so I definitely want to color here with pencils, and I need to experiment more with acrylic gesso because that's the only way how you can use watercolor in this book. Maybe next time I will try to use a lesser amount of water and even softer brush when I apply acrylic, or maybe next time I will try to use gouache. Maybe more opaque paint will behave slightly better here and there won't be such dots. But I don't have enough skills how to color sky or grass with gouache, so it will be another interesting experiment for me. Anyway, I am glad that I hadn't abandoned this page. I had such thoughts, but then I told myself that no, you need to proceed and you need to do this relaxed coloring when you don't expect anything from the beginning. You can still get some nice result in the end and you can surprise yourself with the final look of this page. Anyway, at least I started to color in this book, because it's a shame that it's sit on the shelf without being colored, mostly because of these problems with paper. But honestly, if publishers of the book could receive my message, I would highly recommend to think about testing paper for various medias. And I don't know how we're supposed to color this book without paints and with paints, because yeah, paper is quite difficult to deal with. I think that here I will continue to experiment with my acrylic gesso and watercolor backgrounds on various pages with trolls, goblins, and other evil creatures, where stains and dirt on the background, it can match the style of the picture, and more beautiful pages with elven palaces with sea landscapes I will leave for later time, when I finally find a solution how to color on this paper. If you have similar edition, I will be very happy to hear your opinion how to color here. Maybe I do something wrong, why I can't put gesso and to put watercolor in nice way without having these problems with buckling paper and pools of watercolor. Yeah, next time I will try to use a lesser amount of water. Maybe I need to use something slightly, maybe I need to use mix of gouache and watercolors. Watercolor will help to cover areas in more smooth way, and gouache will help to mask paper better. That's definitely not a problem of watercolor brands, because here I used Ukrainian paints and Royal Talents paints, so it's not problem with my watercolor paints. It's something that I still hadn't learned about acrylic gesso and how to use it properly, how to prepare paper. Yes, I tried to lay it down in very smooth movements without applying gesso 2 times on the one area. Using soft brush, I let it dry for some time, so that's definitely not mistakes which I did, but still working on such prepared paper, it was really very difficult because of that buckling and paint which terribly wanted to flow near the binding and to create some pools in the waves which were created after buckling of the paper. Anyway, I hope that I will finish this one. I definitely recommend you don't abandon your colorings even you are not 100% happy with the coloring during the coloring process. You still can think maybe to switch to other media, to experiment a little bit more how you can cover those areas which you don't like, and anyway you can gather some interesting info about various art supplies and how to use them properly, so next time you will be more prepared for such cases. Goblins and wall behind them I will color with pencils, and at least for pencils this paper indeed is great. I tried both cheap and more professional pencils, and everything lay down on this paper quite well. So maybe I also need to try and to find here pictures where background is smaller and where you can use bigger amount of pencils and just small amount of paint for the sky background. I would love to do a page on the left on Rohirrim warriors, but there I need to do sky, and yeah, it also could be quite a huge problem to do simple blue sky behind those warriors. So maybe for now I will skip this page on the left, even if it's quite pretty. I hope that this video wasn't very boring. Next parts will be slightly more interesting, of course, if you are into coloring such ugly creatures. But sometimes it's interesting to do those unusual skin tones and to practice how to do bricks also. Thank you for listening, and until the next videos.